Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by owner of Skahan Sport Conditioning, Sean Skahan. Most recently, Sean was a head strength and conditioning coach for the Minnesota Wild from 2016 through 2022. He served in the same capacity for the men's ice hockey and field hockey teams at Boston University in 2015-2016. Prior to joining the Terriers in the summer of 2015, Sean spent 13 seasons as a strength and conditioning coach for the Anaheim Ducks. During his time with the Ducks, the team advanced to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2003 and won the Cup in 2007. Prior to working with the Ducks, Sean served as an assistant strength and conditioning coach at Boston College and the University of North Dakota. Sean's a great friend of mine. I was lucky enough to work with Sean for three development camps, two in Anaheim and one in Minnesota. Fantastic human being, great coach. Learn a ton from Sean. I love the simplicity in his approach. And it's a really interesting conversation. I mean, he's been doing this at high levels for 20 plus years. And his journey, his background, his experience in the college setting, coaching changes in landscape to today's strength and conditioning performance to when he got in. It's a great conversation. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Sean. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. An honor and a privilege.
Right back at you. We go back a long time. Had the honor and privilege of working several development camps with you. We're quote unquote Boyle guys. And I've always enjoyed our time. I always learned something from you. You've been doing this for a long, long time at a very, very high level. 20 years in the National Hockey League. Let me tell you, not many people wear that badge. Pretty special. As I see the sign or the frame behind you, over 1,000 games in the league. I want to start by rewinding back, Sean. Talk to me about how you got involved in the craft. Like specifically, what led you to the opportunity to be a National Hockey League strength coach?
Great question. Well, I went to UMass Boston in Boston, Massachusetts, and I was originally an athletic training major. And I also played football at the time for a now defunct Division III football team that's not there anymore. And at the time in Massachusetts, to sit for your National Athletic Trainers Association exam, you had to have a cumulative of 1,600 hours to sit for that exam. And you had to have, I want to say, like half of those hours working with a contact sport. And so I was playing the actual only contact sport at our university. So at the time I was thinking like, wow, I'm going to be in school a long time if I really want to do this. But it was actually pretty neat. We had a professor by the name of Dr. Avery Feigenbaum. He's a big wig in the NSCA, and now he is, I should say. Back then he was an exercise science professor. Well, this guy happened to be our professor at UMass Boston for 2 years. For 2 years only. He was there for 2 years and happened to be my junior and senior year at UMass Boston. And so at the time, I believe we were doing the Nebraska Cornhusker power training program for our football team. And so I was seeing results. I like lifting. And I started to learn that like, hey, I could get faster. I could get stronger, more powerful by doing some of these lifts. And Dr. Feigenbaum brought the NSCA to UMass Boston. And like, this is the profession of strength and conditioning instead of the ACSM model that the exercise science majors were following at the time. And I was hooked. I was an average student up until probably my junior year. Then all of a sudden I was taking classes in exercise testing, kinesiology. I was at least a B+ student, I should say that, in all those classes. So yeah, no, that was kind of my first kind of initial exposure to what strength and conditioning is. And then when it came down to our internship opportunities, there was Boston College, there was Boston University, there was Harvard and Northeastern to apply for. And I actually applied to Boston University because I remember seeing Mike Boyle on TV with Cam Neely during the Bruins days and reading, back then this is all newspaper stuff, and reading about Mike and Mike Mamula, who was the guy that he prepared for the NFL Combine. So I'm like, I thought like, he's probably a good guy to work for. He probably knows some people. And so I applied for that internship, and Mike just took over it's called Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, but then it was called Sports Acceleration North. He just transitioned full time from BU to that role, and I got to intern under Glenn Harris, who's a great guy. He's still at BU.
That's right. Yeah.
And then I did get to know Mike, and I worked with Mike that summer, where there was hundreds of hockey players and probably 50 or so NHL players who were playing in the NHL at that time. And so for me, at the time, I was thinking, I was going to go the football route and, be a sideline get back guy and work with football players because I played football. That's all I knew. But then I started seeing like a need or a career path of hockey. And that's just how it worked out. I went to grad school at the University of Minnesota where they still have a great hockey program. Then my first full-time position was at the University of North Dakota, which also has a pretty historic hockey program. And then my first full-time gig was at Boston College, where I was going to be in charge of the men's hockey program, amongst other sports. So like next thing you know, I had 3 or 4 years of elite college hockey experience. And that's how it transpired. I was there one season at Boston College with Coach York, Jerry York, who's a legend. And what was good for me is that he ran that college hockey program like a pro environment. I would be running their team warmups on a daily basis. I was traveling with the team. We were getting our lifts in quite a bit, and it was important to him. And so Anaheim came calling after that 1 year, and I spent the next 19 years in the NHL.
That's unbelievable. And it's a long road. You mentioned Mike Boyle, and I know you and I both share both friendship and mentorship with Mike. I'll never forget. Probably, this had to be. And Sean, you might be able to post date this, but Functional Strength Coach 1. Remember the DVD series?
Yeah.
That DVD series continues to have a profound impact on the way I program. You're always fond of saying, like, if you look at your old programs, 20 years ago, and you're doing them now, some of those ideas that Mike shared were such aha moments for me that continue to shape the way I think, even though those were quote unquote 20 years old. It was that important at the time. What a guy he was. And I'm sure to this day you bounce ideas off Mike, huh?
Absolutely. We just, I don't know, Instagram message each other about dumbbell lunges yesterday. So yeah, to be honest with you, no, but yeah, Mike's awesome. And like, it's just like what I really respect about him. He just does it out of just the goodness of who he is.
Yep.
And so I do have a problem when people, these uneducated people might bash Mike for something so stupid.
Yep.
When the guy just gets results with his athletes year in and year out. There's a reason why Jay Pandolfo went there year after year. Mike Greer went there year after year, and they played in the NHL for a long period of time. So the results are spoken for, and yeah, I'm not afraid to say that I'm a Boyle guy. So
absolutely. So you mentioned this led you to Anaheim. Walk the listener through your first few years in the National Hockey League. Like I'd imagine, like let's just take a look at now, right? This is my bias and my lens. We're inundated with sports science, technology, measurement, larger staffs. Back in those days, it was a staff of one. Correct me if I was wrong. Compare and contrast the landscape your first year in the National Hockey League with what you're seeing now.
Oh my God, drastic.
Okay.
So my first year, I'll get into another story. My first year, I want to say that, well, our mutual friend Mike Babcock hired me, and his philosophy was on strength and conditioning, was that we need a strength and conditioning coach here. Well, at the time, Anaheim had 2 athletic trainers, 1 head athletic trainer, 1 assistant athletic trainer, 2 equipment managers, a head and an assistant. So there was 4 of us on the training staff. Well, they had to eliminate the assistant athletic trainer position to hire myself. Wow. So it was the head athletic trainer, and like that's just now, like I couldn't even imagine what that was like for the head athletic trainer at the time. So I was the strength coach. There was 2 equipment managers. That was the staff.
Wow.
And I want to tell this story because I got to Anaheim and I got the position. I'm excited to work with, Babs and get going. And and I was talking to my future coworkers about, what to expect. And all I kept hearing about, like, Paul this, Paul that, Paul this, Paul that. I'm like, okay, Paul Korea, obviously. Paul likes this, Paul likes to do that. And at the time, the Ducks had a salary cap of $36 million. I want to say Paul was making 11 or 12 million at the time. And so I got it while it was like, hey, Paul likes to do this, Paul likes to do that. And I'm like, I think my team background, that's all I knew, Ant. That's all I knew. I work with teams. That's all I knew. And I was nervous about meeting with Paul. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to lunch with Paul Korea. And like everyone, even guys who at the rink were like, oh yeah, make sure you take care of Paul, which is fine. I get that. Met with Paul and I was telling someone on a podcast recently, Paul was like, you know what? We don't work out enough. We got to get everyone, we got to get everyone going here. And Paul had his own, and this is the great thing about PK was that the weight room at the time had a leg press, had a multi-hip, it had a hamstring leg curl, it had a leg extension machine, and maybe like a free barbell a bench press with a barbell for the whole team. And for what I understood, it was Paul's gym. It was because I could be wrong. There was I shouldn't, throw shade here. There was a consultant that worked with them at the time, but he was also a client. Paul was also a client of his. So that's what I was kind of getting into. And to hear Paul say, well, I had to explain to him, like, hey, Paul, just so you know, we need to be able to train the whole team in here. And so as a result, some of the equipment's gone. And he's like, why? I'm like, well, here's why. And here's what we can do instead. He's like, awesome, great, awesome. And then, like, next thing you know, like, I got over that hump and then just had my team background and we got going with NHL strength and conditioning that way. So
Yeah. And now I think, compare and contrast that now with that. I think those conversations certainly still happen, especially if you're a newer strength coach.
yeah,
But the resources in terms and measures of the staffs now are much larger in different positions within the staff, right? You've got your director of sports science, your strength coach, your assistant strength coach, your ATs, assistant ATs, manual therapists. So I think that, would you agree with me that that's a better thing in the fact that you're able to service the athletes specifically in an 82 game schedule? Or would you say, hey, there was a beauty to that back in the day?
good question. I'd say yes and no, because I'll be realistic. There's people in some of those roles that have personalities of doorknobs that 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 like, that can measure everything, that can measure this, measure that. But when are you training? When are you training? I don't know. I get fed up because a lot of people that are on their high horses about, this stuff. And the reality is you can't, I don't know, maybe I'm too realistic, or people might think it's a negative point of view, but it's also realistic from years and years of experience.
Sure.
If you're measuring all the time, what where's the roadmap? You might be getting on a plane to go on a 18-day road trip. What are you going to do? Like, that's the reality of the profession. And I still think it's a people business. Can you get your athletes to do what you are going to ask them to do? I think that's the most important thing. And I don't know. I don't know. Like, the size of the staffs are increasing. I think it's good because you help them to service the athlete, but you also, I don't know. I just have my thoughts. You also don't want to be babying the athlete. I think
100%.
I think athletes need to be pushed and coached. They need to work when they don't necessarily want to work.
Sure.
I don't know. I just
There's a balance. There's a teeter totter, and I understand what you're
yeah,
saying. I see it, at least from an outsider looking in. I see it like in both ways. Sometimes I get frustrated with the fact that I'm like, gosh, we're hiring some people that really don't even know about the game of hockey and have never worked with teams before, and they're in these positions where they're potentially having influence on coaches or players. And at the end of the day, for me though, from the lessons that I've learned and through my own lens and doing this, and trust me, again, this is not a monologue. I'm fascinated with the measurement. I've tried to read more and more and more, specifically, and being a skeptical thinker, because I don't want to be confused with a measurement. But at the end of the day, for me, the perception of the program is more important than the program itself. And if you can't lead, if you can't create an environment, if the guys don't want to be around you, you can measure anything you want, but it ain't going to work.
100%. It's still a people business. Looking back, I mean, I wish I had someone I was in it when a lot of things are getting thrown at you,
Sure.
whether it's analysis, this device, or that one. And I honestly, Ant, I really struggle with companies that say they can do certain things that are a pain in the ass to work with. I was texting people on a daily basis, like, hey, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? That was very frustrating for me, because the presentation to the athlete, those companies don't think about. Hey, what I'm talking about?
Oh
And
yeah,
that
I do.
I had a tough time with that, and those companies probably had a tough time with me as a result. But it's a high pressure environment. Like these workouts, or these sessions, I should say, you don't have a lot of time with these guys. You don't have a lot of attention span to give them a training session when they have practice. They got to go home to see their wife and kids. They have a game the next day. They don't know if they're going to be in the lineup or not. And so, like, there's a disconnect there, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
Ant.
I think then this is from my personal experience dealing with high level athletes, but I think the explanation, like you said, is so critical, because if you don't provide a clear narrative, it is like blood in the water of sharks, and you will not get buy-in for that said technology. The other thing I think always comes back to me. This was something I picked up just listening and hearing some really wise coaches speak. John Stevens, excuse me, the assistant coach for the Vegas Golden Knights, told me once when he coached under Daryl Sutter. He said anytime that was brought technology up or any kind of measurement, you always ask the coaches, how does it help the player?
Mm-hmm.
You better be prepared to tell me how that helps the player. And, you don't have an opportunity to go over, well, the research said, no, you better be able to come up with a narrative,
Yeah,
and hopefully the technology not only works, but it delivers, and how that helps the player.
I think strength and conditioning coaches and high performance people need to be careful. You
Mm-hmm.
can't you can't let the technology dictate your program. Like, I can remember vividly, we were on a heater with Minnesota. I want to say we won 7 in a row, and I collected technology. I think we were using First Beat, and we had excellent buy-in from the players up and down on practice days. And I started, developing an algorithm of looking at, okay, what we're doing. But I remember, I always say to myself, I don't want a guy who complains a lot to come and complain to me about practice. I also don't want a player who doesn't work hard enough come to me and complain about practice. But when a player comes to me who's works his butt off every day and says, hey, can you talk to Bruce? We need a day off. I'm like, yeah, yes. And because I ran my numbers. This is real life. I mean, you can't. I ran my numbers. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I knew we needed a day off, but I wasn't going to Bruce until something like this occurred. And then next thing you know, we still won like 4 games in a row.
Yep.
And I remember I used to go out on the ice before warmups, and Bruce. It's actually funny because at the time we didn't practice one day, and all the media expected us to practice. And Bruce ran his media availability. He's like, "Why didn't you practice?" Like, "Well, Sean said we shouldn't." So I'm like, okay, so that's what I'm telling people, you got to be careful of this, because oh my God, was I sweating it out the whole next 48 hours? Like, we better beat Chicago. We better beat Chicago. And we actually won the game. But I remember Bruce was like, hey, no matter what, we are practicing tomorrow. This is like during a warm up. And there's times when the data might have said, hey, you guys should practice. Well, We just won 4 in a row, which is very hard to do in the National League.
Oh,
And next thing you know, we practice, and I think the boys, I think we lost in a shootout or something like that the next day, and then I think we lost 2 out of 3. And so that was my point is that you just got to be careful. If that makes sense.
big time, big time. And
Yeah.
I like your idea too. And again, we do this in the private sector with the teams that we work with in season specifically. Dan Paff calls them bell cows. You call them your leadership council, whatever it may be. Yeah, we collect some quantitative information, perceived exertion, modified Borg scale. I'm doing this for 20 years. Used to do HRV. Doing this for 20 years, two things that have come to me as the most important are the bell cows. So who are my leaders and those people that are going to tell me, hey, coach, we're good to go here. And not telling me what I want to hear. And then, hey, how you feeling today? Like, how's everybody feeling? And then, of course, Sean, common sense. Like, hey, we just came off 3-3. We just got done traveling across. I get it. Like, that's just. But I've found through all the, and by the way, saying about the HRV, I'm not speaking poorly about that. I think it's a great tool. Here's the problem, though. Unless you get up every day at the same time with the same nutrition, with the same there's always going to be a reliability issue. And what you don't want to happen is make decisions on noise. And there's so much noise. It's just hard to have the signal and distinguish that. I've found through my experience in the private sector that just asking someone how they're doing and having leadership or your leadership council answer that question works 1,000 times, probably more efficient.
Yeah, I remember back in the day in Anaheim, I'd have a Excel sheet and I'd hand out pieces of paper when the guys came in the weight room. It was a 10 question. I had a formula and every day was color coded.
Yep.
And then I brought that to the app that they could do on their phones. And no one did it. Like, that's what I struggle with. And like you said, I remember giving a talk one time and about our in-season strength and conditioning program, and someone asked me, what do you do for monitoring? I go, and this was probably early 2010s or something. I said, I ask them how they're doing. And it was like, what? You're not doing, you're not doing HRV analysis. You're not doing force plate jumps. Like, I don't know. Again, it's, I struggle with it because I think the human element is very important.
100%. And you and I could speak about this. I could speak about this for the next hour with you. We have force plates. I have way more questions than I do answers. And most of the time when you purchase something like that, you have a research question first or a question that you want to get answered. For me, we feel that we originally purchased them for readiness and asymmetry indexes, only to find out that we're trying to get more performance based. But the question becomes, how reliable are those measures, like you just talked about? So it's a big challenge for everyone involved in it. So
my thing is, what are you doing with the information? I know Eric Ranahan did an unbelievable job with the St. Louis Blues, and actually Nelson with Columbus. I'm probably safe to say I know Devin's probably doing a good job with the Coyotes. So it's like, that's what I don't know. That's what I struggle with. And I said, what is the proper use of my time?
100%.
That's what it came down for me.
100%. Walk us through too, your first few years in the league. What were some things when you look back in retrospect, learning experiences, mistakes made, and what were your goals during that time? Was it just getting buy-in from the players? So mistakes and then things that you feel that, when you were coming in young and hungry in the league, that your goals were non-negotiables potentially.
Yeah, great question. I think mistakes made, I really struggle with the fact that I had to individualize some parts of the programs to different people. I wasn't just, this is our workout today. We need to attack this as a team, as a group. But in terms of creating buy-in, my goal is just to incorporate a team strength and conditioning program. And what's crazy? Like those guys in that first Ducks team, like we worked out all the time after games on the road. Really awesome. And I think the main reason why is because of that. I talked about earlier, Paul Correa being the captain. He was strength training, he was conditioning, and everyone just kind of fell into place. It was unbelievable. And I just continued that for the next 19 years.
100%.
Mistakes made, I'd say definitely that all is, our facility logistics weren't that good. So you really, I did individualize some things as we went along, but I also, this is 2002 now, like next couple years, like we had a couple studs come in who are going to be future Hall of Famers. Absolutely. And it was from the top, it was like, we got to get these young guys going. And it was, they were playing them 25 minutes a night. And that's stressful. And so, like, okay, you guys think they're out of shape, but they're playing 25 minutes a night. And you want me to keep pushing these guys when we didn't have many days off for practice that day. These kids were elite thoroughbreds that I guess, at the time I knew they needed more rest and recovery. But at that time in my career, I didn't have the authority to go and tell my head coach and GM that, like, hey, they need to be backed off, because they were rookies. They need to understand the commonplace of working hard and everything. But I should have been able to say, you guys need to back off. We'll tell them you worked out, if that makes sense,
This episode has been brought to you by the High Performance Hockey Masterclass. The High Performance Hockey Masterclass is a comprehensive lecture series exploring the science and practice of high performers in the sport of ice hockey. It was designed and created and engineered by myself, Anthony Donskoff. It is an 8-part lecture series that includes metric fixation, the tyranny of metrics, reading research, what matters, going back to get my PhD as a 40-year-old, how do you target your readings in terms of digesting, accumulating, and reading your research, biomechanical considerations for ice hockey, the adductor magnus, how we program hip health during the off-season and in-season, the Gain, Go, Grow model, this idea of a 3-day rollover program for high-performance hockey players, considerations for the in-season, how to manipulate that model for high performers, our communication structure within the confines of Donskoff Strength and Conditioning, and finally, the fast and frugal tree, considerations for return to play. More information on the High Performance Hockey Masterclass can be found at anthonydonskov.gumroad, GUMROAD.com. Thanks for listening. Coaching changes, 20 years in the National Hockey League. Walk us through, and I know every individual is different, so that's why I'm asking you how you handled that. How did it, as a strength and conditioning provider, are those conversations when a new coach walks in where you're going to try to get a meeting immediately and say, or does it work the other way around? And then what are the repercussions? What are the ripple effects from your experience?
Well, I just want to preface this with that, I'm really proud of the fact in all those 19 years, I only worked with 4 head coaches. And
Jeez.
I'm proud of that. And I'm not saying like our strength and conditioning program allowed them, to keep their jobs for so long, but that's pretty cool. Coaching changes. Well, Mike Babcock hired me. I worked with him for 2 seasons. Then he went to the Red Wings after that lockout. And then we hired Randy Carlisle under Brian Burke. And I remember with Randy, it was a really quick conversation. I shook his hand, and I think he was impressed that I gripped his hand hard. And so, yeah, no, it was great.
Yep.
Brian Burke was fair. He's like, hey, you know what? We're going to give you a 1-year contract. If it's going good with the coach, we'll extend you. And that's what happened. And then Randy was unfortunately let go, I want to say 2010 or 11. And Bruce came in. Bruce, you got to know Bruce.
Yep.
I
What
think,
a guy.
yeah, incredible human being. And then they all are. I need to say that. But then Bruce came in mid-season and we kept it going. And then unfortunately, Bruce was let go a few years back, and then one of his assistants took over. So there was kind of that seamless transition. No one came in and ruffled my feathers by any means. So if that makes sense.
No,
Yeah.
It does. Through this, right? At one point after your tenure in Anaheim. You leave, right, before picking up that job in Minnesota, and you're at Boston University, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Um, Talk to me about that transition. Number one for you personally. That's the first part of that question. From a personal standpoint, walking away at that point in the, I want to say walking away. You're in the National Hockey League now. You're coming to college hockey, right? And then what are the differences when you say, "Oh, Anth, geez, it was a difference in training. We had less games. We were able to work harder. We were able to push more." What were those differences, if any?
Yeah, I think leaving Anaheim, I think for me at the time was the right move to do. There's a lot of different I mean, I really don't want to get into it, but I think it
Yep,
came
yep.
out in the media a couple years ago, and a big reason why I left. So, yeah, it was time to move. It was time to move on, and BU was an opportunity for me. I love college hockey. Number one, I got to work with Quinny for a season. Number two, and God, there was probably at least, I mean, Grizzlick, McAvoy, Greenway, um, three or four guys that are full-time NHLers right now. And so that was a lot of fun. And I got to get Charlie ready for the scouting combine, which was awesome. And see him get picked high. And that was a lot of fun. And yeah, I could do a lot more. Like I came in, I said, I want to do something different. I wanted to do something that I'm learning about that I want to implement. And I think I did Jim Wendler's 5-3-1 program.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, yeah.
And these kids just kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger and leaner. And unfortunately, we did have those guys, but we also, we didn't have the best talent in Hockey East that year. And so when Minnesota approached me, I should say, Bruce was just hired, and Chuck Fletcher, who was a really, really good friend of mine, was a GM for the Wild at the time. And it just seemed like the right move. And so that was it.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And obviously, I have a brother that's a coach. It's
Yeah.
not easy to pick up and just move, right? Like that's not like those aren't
No,
easy decisions.
absolutely. No, it wasn't. It was a very, that decision at the time. I mean, yeah, I could get into again, the specifics, but it was time to move. And like, I got to the point where like, I'm done here, let's go. And that's what it was. And I just knew things were going to work out. I really did. I mean, you just got to believe in yourself and in your value to the hockey game. And that's what transpired.
Well, that's outstanding and unbelievable. Like you said, right from the start, the background, you're just a hockey hotbed. BU, BC, North Dakota. I mean, the mentors along the way. This is a unbelievable. I want to pivot now. I want to start right now with a new endeavor. Right, you have your own company, Skahan Sport Performance. Right.
Mhm.
Talk to me about that. What was your now, correct me if I'm wrong. You tell me the demographic for you is going to be probably, I'm guessing, right? So don't college professional players, youth players. Is that proper?
Absolutely, it is. Yep, 100%.
And how did that time in the National League prepare you for right now? What are the maybe a better question? And I know you and I spoke off here. What are the challenges in something like that? Right? I can speak. I could speak for days about having a business like this now for 20 years with youth athletes, good, bad, and ugly. But what do you see now in your lens?
Yeah, great question. So I originally started it. I was renting space out of a gym, training kids like my son's age and his buddies. I was renting space out of this gym. It's actually a great guy. It was a CrossFit gym.
Okay.
However, the layout was like, wow, this is actually a pretty cool place. And you wouldn't even know it was there if you were driving by. I'm like, this layout is outstanding. You can get a lot done here. So I was renting space from him, training my athletes, and late August of 2023, he's like, "Hey, would you want to take over?" I'm like, "I didn't really think about it." And I eventually said yes. And it was frustrating. Not frustrating. It was difficult because his whole clientele, he had a lot of members, a lot of people working out there,
Yep.
and not saying wrong with it. They had His clients had 24/7 access to the facility. They had key card entries. They can come in and train whatever they want. They could do whatever they want. Sometimes they weren't being supervised.
Yep.
So I didn't necessarily take on the business. I took on the facility. And that was very, very stressful because I didn't know what was going to happen. And going back to people skills, I had some beers with a couple members of a board for an area youth hockey
Yep.
club, and boom, we had Bantam teams and Pee Wee teams coming from that club all year, all season long. Another program we had their preseason athletes. Another program we had about 20 kids coming in. Then I had my kids who were training for the preseason for the Minnesota High School League. And so yeah, like this past year was difficult, but we got our presence going, we have a website, we have our marketing going, and now we're getting pretty full for the summer with lots of Division One kids, three NHL guys, and the youth market. That's what we're going to be hammering home. And I just going back, like I love it. I love it, we talked about it off
Yep.
air. I wish I'd done this years ago. And I'll get into this. Like I kind of felt like the last few years in the National League, I did it a long time, man.
I know.
And so, it's some of these people in these roles now, they probably won't get it. And that's okay. That's okay. When your sons are, I have now a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old, and it's like, man, I didn't get a lot of time with them doing this. And I can say, yeah, I can say I trained Kirill Kaprizov. I can say that 100%, but I really enjoy the development aspect of these kids making the National League. I really enjoy that. And I can apply that knowledge of working with those 18-year-old kids who we drafted, whether it's Anaheim or Minnesota, to help them get to become full-time NHL players. I can use that experience and help these kids not necessarily make the NHL, to make a college Division III team, to make varsity on your high school team. Like that's where I get my rocks off right now, and I absolutely love it.
It makes massive sense. They say experience comes at the user's expense, and obviously, our our uh, our background, our family is different. Obviously, I don't have any kids. I have a nephew and nieces, but I understand that. I also understand what you said before about development, and you tell me if I'm wrong about this. I've spoken about this in the podcast before. You have an 82 game season in the National Hockey League. An 82 game, that's 82 car crashes. This idea of management versus development, like, are we going to, like, are you really going to try to put 5 pounds on a rear foot elevated split squat in the middle of an 82 pound, like 82 games? Like, that's more of managing stress, pull the fire alarm without burning the house down. You know what I mean by that? Like, and then conversely, now you take that away, and I see, at least from my narrative, number one, off season, right? You could argue that you're going to develop, but also even with a much smaller, although in youth hockey now, my gosh, it's starting to get like major junior in terms of games, but
Mm-hmm.
that development focus, we were able to really feel that, hey man, we're in a quote unquote strength program, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I would love getting the young rookies, because you know, you get a young kid. We get a lot of kids from the major junior programs that maybe didn't lift a lot during their seasons. Okay, you're a 19-year-old kid in the National Hockey League now, and your body's going to adjust and adapt to the stress, but we're also going to lift weights a lot, quite a bit. And so I got to see some really huge improvements for these young kids during that year because they never lifted that much. As you know, like we've talked about this numerous times, like we would lift after games. And people are like, "Oh my God, you lift after games." Well, it's not for an hour and 15 minutes. We're in and out in 20. We were in and out in 20 minutes. And I always just kept doing that over and over and over again. And these kids adapted to that, and they got, most importantly for me, they didn't get hurt as much. And I just kept doing that over and over again. And those young kids would grow and flourish in those situations.
Yep. I like that idea. And you know, you read what you talked about when you did in season and after games. I think there was an article, you probably read it in the Athletic 2-3 months ago. I think Kevin Neal it was interviewed, and I don't know who else was, but it talked about the reasoning behind that. Makes complete sense, right? I don't whatever you want to call it, micro dosing. That's the fancy word for it, whatever. But the bottom line is two things. Number one, it's maintain what you have, because the best way to get strong on the off season is not losing it in the in season, right? And the other thing is, if you don't give someone that stress somewhat consistently, the moment you give it 2-3 weeks down the road, now you are going to get sore because it hasn't been given.
Right.
And that's a problem.
And that was the premise of my off season, my in season strength training protocols all the time, because I don't want you to get sore.
100%.
So in those road trips would sometimes mess that up, and would get sore. I remember this is a funny story. You'd appreciate this because Babs was involved. We got Stevie Thomas from Chicago at the deadline my first year, Stumpy.
Yep.
And he was awesome. We were doing one leg squats. Stumpy does one leg squats, and it showed me that, okay, our guys are doing it all the time. They can do one leg squats deep, holding weights and weight vests and all that, and they were doing it. Stumpy does it. The next day, this poor guy couldn't walk, and I got Babs coming. Hey, yeah, well, let's we don't have to make Stumpy work out. I'm like, all right, yeah, that sounds good. Because the guy was a legend. He was on that movie. Yeah. So, anyways, he actually went and scored like 10 overtime winning goals. I'm like, yeah, just don't worry. We'll do split squats or step ups or whatever you want to do, Stump. And that's story.
You know what?
I thought I'd mention that.
No, it's funny, but and going off the parlay off that, we specifically we tell our, and this is going to lead to my next question, which is parent education, specifically where you're at now. But that kind of stuff, soreness, et cetera, that allows us, at least in the private sector, for us in designing our programs, is we try to choose exercises, whether we front load the top of the week or the back of the week, where we're choosing exercises where we're able to get strength without that delayed onset muscle soreness. For example, now, I don't know if you've done this, like you might pick up a trap bar deadlift and drop it, not lower it, the eccentric portion. It might be a step up, or it might be a sled march where you're still getting a stimulus, but you're not getting sore because you're doing your best to eliminate that stretch under load. That makes sense,
100%. And I should mention that today's Tuesday, and we had our groups last night actually, and first time we incorporated dumbbell alternating lunges.
Yep.
And I'm like, hey guys, there's a really good chance you're going to get sore tomorrow. You're going to feel this muscle called the adductor magnus that you don't know that you have, but you're probably going to feel it tomorrow. And so you give them a warning, like, hey, it might be coming, but no, we're going to do it. It's Monday.
Yep.
A lot of these kids might have games this weekend. Even though it's April, they might have games this weekend. So it's a good point you just made. We did it earlier in the week, and I expect them to be sore tonight, but.
And it's 100, you know what, that's exactly the narrative that we use. It's funny you mentioned that. So again, I think this is a kind of a cool conversation. Hopefully some of the young strength coaches at least can learn from this. Like even for us in season, for us, if we're going to use a hamstring dominant exercise like an SLDL, we'll always front load at the top of the week, because the hamstring's a longer muscle. It's a type 2 muscle. It's going to have a tendency to be sore, right? And then obviously if you're playing Friday, Saturday, the goal is to have that all dissipated and no problem. And you're going to have a knee dominant, which is your slow twitch quad later in the week, because that's hopefully not going to affect you based on the volume that you're programming in season. These are all small things where it's not rocket science, but it is exercise science,
100%. And looking back to my time in the National League, so if we had a game on a Sunday night and Monday was a complete day off, practice Tuesday, play Wednesday, that workout after the Sunday night game, we were going to hit our legs pretty good, because one, they were used to it. Two, if there was any delayed onset muscle soreness, they had until Tuesday when they practice again. But when you do that over and over and over again, they adapt. And then sometimes you have to throw something new at them. Maybe it's a new exercise. Maybe it's a new implement. So you just kind of keep the body stressed and keep on stressing it in different variations.
100%. Challenges now in the private sector. We talked off air about this, but I'm curious as to how you deal with it, and if you deal with it at all. But educating the masses. For us, I'll give you an example. We've been the official strength and conditioning provider for an organization here in Columbus for the past 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can appreciate, you've got your U18s who move on. You've got young kids who are you got existing kids who get cut and new kids into the program. The challenge for us is always education, right? If specifically with parents, because they're sending their kids to us. Do you see that in the private sector? If not, what are your current challenges?
Great question. I do see that in the private sector because sometimes we get asked, "What do you guys do?"
That's right. All the time.
They don't. Yeah, all the time. What do you guys do there? Talking to one of the managers, bringing the team in. Oh, do they need their sticks? They need their gloves? Like, no. No, we're not stick handling. We're not shooting. We're a strength and conditioning facility. And if it's me and you talking, but people aren't like me and you, where they don't know what strength and conditioning is. So you do have to educate on what you do, why you do it, and I mean, for the most part, like you know what it's like. The word of mouth marketing is it's impactful, and so it's now they're saying, hey, I hear the kids talking like, hey, I'm going to Skahan's tonight. It's like that's good word of mouth marketing, and I think the word gets out there what we do and how we do it, and yeah, that's what we hope to accomplish.
Fantastic. Last pivot here.
Mm-hmm.
Advice to young players. You've got two boys. Had the opportunity to meet them in Anaheim. This is way long ago, man. They were knee high to grasshopper. Now you got one, and I want you to talk about him right now. Big Will, the Thrill, man, getting ready to be in, hopefully, right, in the National Hockey League draft. That's a pretty massive impact. And by the way, if he saw me now, first of all, he wouldn't recognize me. He wouldn't even probably know me, but he would eat peanuts off my head. He's a big boy. So I guess talk to us about your kids. That's the first thing. Then I want you to give some advice, some general advice to young players because you're coaching them right now.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up about Will. Yeah. Well, I think number one, I don't think he kind of shows that strength training doesn't stunt your growth. One thing.
Nope.
So that is not true. It does not. No, like he gets it, man. Like he gets it. He grew up, he was you don't know it when they're children, but coming in and out of the locker room on a daily basis and seeing these pro guys over and over again, and seeing what I'm doing, how hard, these guys perfected their craft. It's unbelievable to see what's going on right now. Like he's talking to NHL teams and like there's projections where he could be drafted. I'm like, holy shit.
That's
like,
awesome.
Really? And then like it makes me think about these 18-year-old kids who were drafted coming into development camps, and like it's full circle for me, if that makes sense.
It does.
It's unbelievable. He's going to the scouting combine.
That's awesome.
I used to go to those scouting combines and be like, these are the best of the best, and I can't wait to see these kids jump and lift, whatever. And like, if I could go back to the NHL for 2 days, I would love to go back and sit there and watch him go through that combine.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
But yeah, no, I'm excited for that, and he's earned it because I'm not Marv Marinovich here. Like he's able to he's embraced it. Like he's always wanted to lift when he was younger, and he's one of those kids who never once bitched or complained about going to practice. And I'm really happy for him. And his little brother he's coming along. He plays golf and hockey and all that, baseball. So it's fun.
We share the same birthday as the man, Wyatt, May 7th,
right.
baby. I never forget that, man.
Oh, that's awesome. It's coming up.
We share the same birthday, baby.
Weeks. Yeah.
How about this last one for you? Advice to coaches, and I'm going to preface it by saying, we talked at the onset of our interview, like you got in the National Hockey League at a very unique time, right? The landscape now is very different. Maybe a better way to ask this last question is, knowing what you know now, what would your advice be to yourself as a young coach, if that makes any sense? And maybe Sean, it doesn't. Maybe Anth, I would do the exact same thing. Start with people. I don't know. for young coaches now, I've talked with Kira when I'm flat about this, just some numbers, and I'm going to throw them out here. I think there's like, and this is ballpark, 37,000 kinesiology degrees in the U.S. I think last year the field has grown 8%. It's an oversaturated field. It's a field where literally you don't even need to have a degree to have. You're going to be a pulse and be a personal trainer, right? I mean, I always tell young coaches, like, make sure your heart's in it for the right reasons. Make sure you love this. It's got to be, coaching's not like, you're not driving Lamborghinis out of your business. And by the way, some people are driven by that. That's okay. But what would your advice be?
Well, to my younger self, for sure. Number one, probably develop a thick skin earlier on, because at first the national, and that's, and you know what, Ant, that's another thing I want to say. Like the players have changed. There were times when these guys in the locker room were ruthless, and you can't, a younger me, like, hey, Sean, don't take that personal. And like, there was guys that became like really, really outstanding friends of mine that I just despise at first because they're always sarcastic and jabbing at you. And then when there was like that aha moment when they were just giving you shit all the time, and from a good place, if that makes sense.
I do. Makes sense.
Like, I would have a thicker skin, and not, I was probably way more insecure, about things. But now I'm at a point now where I really don't care what anyone thinks about me, unless I really respect the person, if that makes sense. And that's helped me flourish. It's helped me grow. It's helped me do things that I never would have imagined myself doing in a million years. So if that makes sense, yeah, just don't take things too personally, because it is a tough business, and if it's not about winning, in my opinion, if it's not about winning, and for me, I would put pressure on myself to have the least amount of man games lost in the NHL on a yearly basis. I couldn't sleep if a guy sustained an injury, and I couldn't. I couldn't embrace that philosophy of, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, what aren't we going to do? That was my, like, inside of me. Like, I want to help this individual get better. I don't care if it's something that a trained physical therapist could only work with this guy. I would always say, you know what? We can work with the other parts. We got to keep this guy going. We got to keep him moving. And yeah, I mean, if not to go off on a different tangent there, but that's where my passion and my fuel was on a daily basis. And winning, man. It's about winning. I always hated it. I'm proud to say, I think 2 seasons we didn't make the playoffs out of those 19, and I hated it. Like, it's just, I'm not counting the days down till the season's over. I'm not doing that. And that was just me. Like, this is unacceptable, because I know it was coming down from the top. Like, this is unacceptable. And, it's not all, rainbows and butterflies all the time. You got to kind of keep trying to get better, keep trying to get better. And that's the same thing with my business now. And I love that.
Our guest today has been Sean Skahan. Sean, thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
And it's always great to see you, pal. And I'm going to have you as a guest on mine. And there will be a Stone Cold Steve Austin audition.
On yours, I promise you. You got it. You got it.
No one needs to know you do that on here. So.
Oh no, it's gonna come. I promise. We'll market it too. Thanks,
hey, always
buddy.
good to see you, and I really appreciate the time here, friend.
Of course, buddy.